Again, if this meeting is recorded, if you do not want to have your screen shared, please turn off your camera. With that, Oliver, thank you so much for your talk, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Which I am the product owner of, and that we've developed for quite a while now. And I show you just like how important it is to have a proper data management system in a research infrastructure such as eBrains, right? You've already heard from Kadri Namunds that the data is a central piece. So organizing the data that is coming from very heterogeneous sources, as in eBrains, is absolute key. So, yes, what is the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph? This is a solution that was originally built for the Human Brain Project from very early on in the neuroscientific context. You see here that it started in late 2017, so it's a rather mature code base. And basically, it has been in production in real world use since then, and is currently handling more than 3 million entities and has proven basically that it helps us to organize ourselves around it. From a technical perspective, it's basically an off-the-shelf graph database, but with a quite powerful service layer on top that was built by us for the semantic metadata management, the metadata management. So basically what we've done is we've built a complete metadata management solution for eBrains. Why I'm emphasizing this? Well, typically when you hear graph or knowledge graph, most of the time you're talking about having a graph database sitting somewhere. But as we've heard, right, we try to be customer oriented, and that means that having purely a graph database is often not enough. There's various things that you want to achieve with a knowledge graph, such as allow the users to explore what you have in the graph. Domain experts to enrich the metadata from multiple sources. You also want to make sure that you have workflows in place that allow you to validate the correctness or the compliance with conventions in an organization. So you need to validate the metadata one way or the other. Obviously, we're not talking about humans only, right? Programmers, bots, etc. They want to consume the data. And last but not least, you also need to organize yourself around it, right? So if we're going to hear about the curation team, so if you organize metadata or data, you need to organize yourselves around it, so you need tooling for this as well. And last but not least, right, tackling more than 3 million entities is obviously not something that you're just doing by yourself by hand, but you have obviously also the need for automation processes in place. And that's what we've basically tried to build with the eBrains Knowledge Graph. You see here a little diagram. So down here, the small graph database, I will go and explain a little bit more about what the icons mean afterwards. But what is more important is the actual service layers. So we have one core element, and then there's plenty of tools on top of it. So we have the knowledge graph search, the knowledge graph visualizer, the knowledge graph editor, query builder, organizer automation. And last but not least, since I saw in the chat that there's developers talking about Zebra Python, obviously we also do have SDKs for the various languages. So it helps you to have an easy binding towards the knowledge graph power from your most favorite programming language. Let's have a look. So I was talking about the knowledge graph search, which might be the initial thing you get into touch with the knowledge graph. You find it here at search.kg.ebrains.eu. And what it is, you could think of a human representation of selected and well-curated graph entities. It's a data publication platform. So what we do is we're publishing data sets, models, software, etc. And for several of those resources, such as data sets, we are issuing DOIs, so make them citable to give incentives for data providers to actually provide the necessary information. I'm saying for humans, It's because if you go and have a look at the detailed view here, you see that there's a lot of metadata combined, getting into a comprehensive context and basically give you a nice overview. Obviously, I was talking before about it before. All this kind of data, metadata, is also available from a programmatic perspective, but in a way more normalized way in this regard. So it contains what you would expect from a search user interface. You have full text search, you have faceted filtering, you have the chance to navigate within, right? You see the links, right? You can explore from one entity that is of interest to you to go through the custodians, let's say, or through the authors to another data set that you might be interested in, etc., etc. All of this is powered by a control, like by partially controlled terminology, but provided by open minds that I will explain a little later. So here is also the curation process involved to make sure that we're having consistent use of things like keywords, methods descriptions, etc., right? I don't need to tell you that we have a lot of divergence in terminology sometimes with synonyms, partially correct synonyms, or like overlapping elements and so on. So this is a lot of work to get this basically in line and use one language to make the different data sets comparable or like, yeah, integrated into each other. Have a look at this. This one is available without authentication layer, so it means you can just go there, start to explore, download your data sets, and spend your weekends analyzing them. So yeah, I hope you will find what you look for. Then, how is this data going in there? I mean, obviously we do have automated input flows, right? So we have integrations with, let's say, data repositories. If you think about having a data storage where you actually hold your data, where you upload your files to, we're not going to ask experts to manually add these elements with a UI into the graph. But for other elements, it is absolutely needed, right? That you can actually register the metadata in a very fine granular manner inside a user interface, and also for basically figure out or like let others do this collaborative approach that was mentioned by Katrin Amunds, right? That you have the data provider adding metadata, having the curation team revising the metadata added, correcting things, and so on. So that's what we've built on top. It's called the Knowledge Graph Editor. It's more than an editor, as I will show you in a second. But it provides basically the functionality that you can immediately manipulate the various entities, again, shaped by the metadata framework OpenMinds. It allows you to navigate through the graph. It has its own little visual language that allows, if once you're getting used to it, to immediately spot if there's elements missing that you might require or not, or gives you an impression, and you can basically navigate through the different connected elements in there. It also includes, and that's why I was saying it's not just an editor, it also includes workflows like release management. I was previously talking about that you need to basically validate the compliance with some conventions. You need to validate that everything is in place as the data provider wants it to be. So what we have is as I said, what we call release management, which allows you to, first of all, preview elements, which is very helpful, right? Especially if you're talking to less technical data providers, it's nice if you can already show them, look, this is the way it will look like when you open it in the knowledge graph search. So they can actually check, is it true or not? And at the same time, we have this mechanism of allowing to publish it and create a snap. You can imagine it like being a snapshot, right? It's the validated snapshot of this metadata information, because we know that the metadata will continue to grow, right? That's the idea of the graphic. There will be always new metadata added, connections built, let's say from derived data sets and so on. So it's good and important that you have basically the possibility to say, this is the state that was validated, and basically embrace the fact that the knowledge in the knowledge graph is growing over time. Then there's also stuff for programmers, obviously. So we have an API, a complete API. So all the tools that you were seeing beforehand are using the publicly accessible API that is also available to you once you have an eBrains account, meaning we don't hide anything or we don't have any hidden API just for us, which also means that this is the good news, right? We are very much aware that this API needs to be up and running. So you have basically this guarantee that we will notice immediately if stuff is not working and we fix it immediately if that's the case. I was talking about the SDKs that we have for Python, Java, and TypeScript. So if you're developing in one of those languages, you have some libraries that you can integrate that simplifies both the access to the APIs as well as the authorization mechanism. We also have an automation in place based on Airflow for registering the various automation parts. We were recently setting up a full workflow that allows us to have contributors from different places allowing to share their automation scripts by still having the control on our end in a central manner, right? That there's not somebody, let's say, adding a Bitcoin mining script or anything like that, but rather like that we have control on what is executed, when is it executed, because often, right, you have very heavy scripts doing heavy operations on it, and you might want to keep control of it when the things are executed on the graph. Well, for those of you that already have MED graph solutions, there are more or less complex query languages around that you might need to get into. But what we said is that in addition to supporting those, we also need a mechanism that really truly allows us to extract this or the information from the graph in a very easy way. Even for people that are not that familiar or not ready for learning complex query languages for graphs. So what we've done, again, in the sake of user focus, we've built a user interface that allows you to basically click and collect the query that you have for the graph by basically just selecting your starting point, picking the attributes you would like, following the links that are registered in the graph, and so on. So the query builder is, in that sense, what we call our interface for it's a starting point for programmers as well as for people that just want to have a one-time report of the metadata information. And here, the comparison from this one towards the search user interface is in the search user interface, we truly just try to aggregate information that might be useful for doing the findability part of the fairness. Whereas in here, we really leave it fully dynamic. You can explore the graph to the extent you would like to. You can add filters, complex filters, and so on. And it basically gives you a lot more power, obviously, to search the graph. And here you also have the possibility to profit from the fully normalized way the metadata is registered in the graph itself. There's a lot more details, but I definitely want to make sure that Archana has a little bit of time for explaining the important curation process as well. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to give you more insight, but yeah, let's just continue. Maybe just a brief talk about the underlying technology. I was mentioning the open minds part that is at the bottom beforehand. So the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph is powered by Marmot Graph in combination with open minds. And the idea is basically that the eBrain's knowledge graph that has been developed to make the technology itself fair with emphasis on the reusability. So what we try to do is to split the two things. On one hand, the graph technology, right? And we labeled it with the name Marmot Graph, which stands for Management Applications for Rich Metadata Objects. And the idea is that all the service layer that I was showing you beforehand, this one is model agnostic, meaning it can treat any kind of metadata structure. So if somebody comes in and says, I don't have another metadata model that I would like to use, but I would like to use your tooling, you can do that because the technology itself is model agnostic, separation of concerns. One important feature this technology has, and that also makes it a little bit more unique, is that we have a very fine granular way of handling access permissions. Because one thing that we've noticed immediately is that often you have information that you need to protect from access from others, at least temporarily, right? So if you're elaborating your research data and registering it, then you might want to protect it at the beginning, maybe opening it up later. Some kind of information might be protected or kept in a local group for longer. So that's a very important thing that we've put emphasis on. I mentioned already beforehand, right? There are ways of extracting metadata to provide it through more standardish protocols. And what I also want to emphasize is that the technology is basically using W3C recommended standards, meaning that we try to maintain the standards as good as we can, also for being able to exchange the metadata between systems, right? Because we know that there's multiple systems out there, that there's different use cases, and we personally think that it's important to keep this data as open, not only in terms of permissions, but also in terms of accessibility in the standards case. I think one of the strengths is that the technology has been co-developed together with Open Minds in the context of HPP eBrains for having basically a continuous reality check, right? You see in the technology that it has strengthened its features by being used every day by real people and not just something being made up somewhere in the dark little room of a developer somewhere. Right, it provides the complete tool set for the management and maintenance of multi-source metadata annotations. I was showing this to you very briefly. And what is also important is that the components that I was showing you are super modular. So it means that you can basically pick one or the other to use. And that's also because we do have different users on the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph that have different needs, and meaning that they are not using all the components, and we totally are happy with this. There's a need to deploy containers out there. And yeah, we also have obviously all the current state-of-the-art ways of deploying it, so it's easy to work with it. That's it about Marmot Graph. Maybe a very, very brief information about Open Minds. It has been mentioned plenty of times. You find more information here at openminds.omi.org. Open Minds, as the Marmot Graph is model agnostic, Open Minds is technology agnostic, meaning Open Minds is a metadata framework that allows you to structure your neuroscientific metadata independently of where it's going to be used, right? So the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph uses Open Minds, meaning you're applying it there, but it can be used with other systems as well. And again, this is basically because of this separation of concerns that allows us to properly focus and also build different communities around the two different things. One strength of Open Minds is that it supports multiple levels of granularity. Now you need to imagine that there are obviously, you're always living in this balance of having data providers giving you high-level information like my data set has something to do with that other data set. It bases on this, right? Not telling you like which files of the other data sets it's using, what was done to the data, to the files, and so on. So this is one way of expressing a dependency between the two data sets. Others might have fully automated pipelines, and you can basically trace back the full provenance, like saying, okay, this file has been taken from this data set, this script has been applied to it, then it has been done with this transformation has been done to it, and so on. And you can actually record this. And Open Minds, and I think one of its main strengths is that it allows you both basically to describe your metadata in a very fine granular way, But at the same time, it also embraces the fact that it's not always possible to establish this, and allows you also to deliver more high-level elements with the possibility to go into more detail afterwards if needed or if wished. Open Minds allows you to to define the structure, the validation logic, and some interpretation hints. So it means that it's not just yet another schema that tells you this is the property ABC that you could use, but it also allows you to say, okay, that's the validation logic, that's the valid values. And additionally, it gives hints for the consuming systems. Why is this nice? It's nice because it gives, let's say, hints to the EBRAINS Knowledge Graph editor and tells it like how to show form, what are possible links, let's say, or what and so on, right? It gives it the necessary information to do a proper visualization, and therefore it helps for providing us nice tooling around it.
10 minutes, Oliver.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Thanks. So Open Minds also has controlled vocabularies. I was mentioning it beforehand that the curators are establishing in their process that the different data providers are using the same terminology in an ideal world, right? So that you can actually jump from one data set to the other if they're using the same, let's say, technique or that they're talking about the same brain area or whatnot. So there are controlled vocabularies involved in Open Minds as well. And additionally, there's various formats and libraries involved. So Open Minds, again, is not just that scheme, but it allows also like nice bindings towards Python. There's MATLAB's libraries around, all of it for making its use as easy as possible. You find the documentation of Open Minds here. It's very extensive, I would argue, and it's continuously growing, obviously. One thing that we already saw in Trygve's presentation is that Open Minds has multiple components in, so it's extensible by design. It means that, yeah, we've seen SANS, which basically handles the spatial location in the brain. There's other modules like computational modules and so on. And yeah, here the vice versa, right? The co-development together with the Marmot graph always basically allowed it to do the reality check and ensured that it is actually applicable in a real world system. I mentioned it before, it's community-based, meaning if you're interested in getting into metadata modeling, which is a very important part of metadata management system, obviously, and also very important for achieving proper fairness and reproducibility, you're more than welcome to participate. You will find all the information right here. I see Wouter has his hand up. Is it?
That was to warn you that you had 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So no question there, or not yet, I hope. So that's a very brief overview. I was telling Wouter in the beginning, I would be able to talk hours about these kind of topics, but I don't want to mess up your schedules of today. So if there's anything you would like to know in more detail, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to give you more insight into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. And maybe I can piggyback on what you just said, more details. We have discussed already maybe the option to have more hands-on workshops following this specific seminar instance, for instance, in 2 or 3 weeks, where we ask you and other colleagues that are participating in Knowledge Graph to go into more details with maybe a specific subset of our Japanese colleagues. That way we can also do a deep dive in addition to these more broader overviews and allow more specific, maybe even collaborations to develop out of that. this is for later. This is this concept we still need to develop. For now, thank you so much, Oliver. In the interest of time, I suggest that we go to Archana, and if there's questions, and we do that afterwards to fill up the time. So, Oliver, thank you so much again. Archana, may I ask you to share your screen?
Yep, give me one
before
second.
we start, would you be okay for you to be recorded? Otherwise, we stop the recording now.
It should be fine. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Perfect. And 1 second. Yeah, you see the correct view?
Now we do.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so yeah, I will briefly talk about the eBrains curation services and let you guys know what we do and yeah, what do we offer for the data providers. I'm Archana and I work as a curator and I'm based in the University of Oslo. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the eBrains data and knowledge services or the curation services, I guess we sort of use them interchangeably, but yeah, the data knowledge services like combine the knowledge graph, the open minds concepts, and the curation services, and all of these three components together enable that the data that's on eBrains is fair. And to share data via eBrains, we have a curation workflow that I will go through briefly. And this starts with data providers requesting for data curation, and they also submit their ethics and law compliance checks. And then we then ensure that the data is organized well, and then provide tools and services for them to upload the data. And we also the metadata we ask the data providers to provide is in open minds format. And we also then ask the data providers to provide a data descriptor. And once we get all of these components, the curators then put them on the knowledge graph, or sometimes the data providers also do that. And then, and then it's all well annotated and then connected to other components on the knowledge graph. And then the data providers also get a preview. And once they're okay with it, we go ahead and publish the data set. To start with the first component, with the curation request form, here we ask the data provider to provide us some basic information about their data, such as contact information, types of data, what is the summary, does it have any related publications? And then we also ask details about the ethics approvals to make sure the data falls under the EU regulations, and especially for human data sharing, it has to be compliant with the EU GDPR. And yeah, once the curation request is accepted, we then get in touch with the data provider, and then the way the curation goes, it's a lot of feedback and reviewing that goes from the curator side. So it's a constant contact with the data providers. And yeah, we at eBrains allow data to be in any format and any standard, but we suggest that the data providers comply to some of the existing standards out there, and we suggest them to we refer them to the INCF best practices and standards, and there are some recommendations we suggest, like BIDS and NWB, and yeah, AutoML and Theory based on the type of data, of course. And for metadata, as mentioned already so many times before, we adhere to the Open Minds metadata standard. And Open Minds is a metadata model for neuroscience graph databases. And as Oliver mentioned, there are different components to it. And the Open Minds development is a community-based development. So based on the needs of the community, there's different OpenMinds components that are developed. I think SANS was mentioned already for the anatomy and atlas data, metadata, and there's also electrophysiology component that is being under development and such, and there's constantly more and more development. Yeah, and the data providers can submit this metadata to us either via a metadata wizard or direct interaction to the knowledge graph. And this direct interaction is enabled by providing the data providers a private space of the knowledge graph that they can interact with and then upload their own metadata. Yeah, there's of course, yeah, these both have like different things they offer. Like the metadata wizard is just easy. It's a web form and it gets all the minimal requirement information, and then the information is directly sent to the curation team. And then we then go ahead and upload it on the knowledge graph. While direct interaction through knowledge graph, yeah, as I mentioned, they can interact with it in the private space that we provide. And then they also have access to the knowledge graph entries that are public, and then they can also try and connect their data with whatever is yeah, applicable. Yeah, and then for data upload, we provide them space, and we offer people long-term service, and then they can either upload the data with manual approach. If it's small data, just drag and drop, easy. But if it's like large files or large number of files, we also have API and upload scripts that users can use. And then we also require that the data providers provide us with a data descriptor. It's a text document where we provide a template, and this template is sort of based on the Nature Scientific Data article template. And yeah, why do we need it? So all the other metadata that is on eBrains knowledge graph is both machine readable and human readable, but this data descriptor here provides more detailed information of the data provenance, which is easier for humans to understand and sort of ingest. Yeah, and then this is then finally uploaded on the repository as a PDF, and then users can access it. Yeah, so I just made like a small animation. No, I guess.
Archana, before you start, 2 or 3 minutes left because then I can close out.
Yep, that sounds fine. Yeah, so yeah, the way the metadata and data once we get is integrated into knowledge graph is by annotating it with all the right entries, and then so this is just an example of how a data set would look like, and then based on these annotations, the data sets are then connected to each other. For example, if there are data sets that share a technique, they are connected. Here, for simplification, is just one component that they're sharing, but there could be different, like the authors could be similar, or they can be sharing different subjects. And then I just wanted to give you an example of how a final data set looks like on the knowledge graph search. Let's see. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay.
We're seeing your presentation.
Oh, you can't see my screen.
No.
Oh well, I guess I'll just show the presentation then. And maybe this one example, I'll stop my screen and share again real quick. Yeah, so I just wanted to give an example of how the data set looks like. So this is a data set, it gets assigned a DOI, and then all the metadata, annotated metadata is visible. There's a short summary, and then we link it to the tools, if applicable, the tools on eBrains. For example, this data set can be visualized on a tool called Localizoom, where you can look more detail into the anatomy of the data. And this applies also for data sets that can be viewed through the Zebra Atlas Explorer and stuff. This is an example of another such data set. Yeah, so that's basically just a brief on how the curation services work and also how they sort of combine the data with the metadata components and also ingest them on the knowledge graph and also combine them with the Atlas tools and other visualization tools we have. Yep.
And thank you, Archana, for this insight into the curation services, which is, I think, one of what I would call the human services in eBrains. There are other human services in eBrains that I would like now the opportunity to quickly thank. That is, for instance, the education department and the science support team that have helped to organize this first seminar. And I think it also shows the insight that in addition to all the tools and technology that we have in eBrains, it's also these additional work of people that is making everything possible and to connect everything. With that said, I want to advertise a little bit the next instances in our seminars. These will be in January, where we will focus on sometimes more technical tools, sometimes more scientific tools, sometimes more workflow related activities. And we'll also have a detailed view on all the different things that people are doing to make things in eBrains possible. With that said, I want to thank again all the speakers for their super interesting talks. Professor Ammons with her high-level introduction to the eBrains services and tools and components. The talks, more detailed views on the Brain Atlas and the Knowledge Graph by Professor Leergaard and Oliver. And finally, this interesting view on the curation process by Archana. Thank you so much, everybody, and for your insight. And